in that divorce, Mackenzie Scott received 25% of the Amazon shares that they had, which were valued at roughly $38 billion. That's right, with a B. Welcome back to the No Judgement Family Law Podcast. I'm Will Halaz, here with you once again. So today we're going to be talking about something that's becoming a little bit more common, something that, kind of going off of our theme of musicians, the inimitable but often mercurial Kanye West all warned us about. We need a prenup, right? We've got Jeff Bezos that we're talking about today, and as many of you know, he is, at the time that we're recording this, he is in the process of getting married to Lauren Sánchez over in Venice. Quite a big to-do, 3-day affair. From what I've read, the estimates on the cost are between $46 and $55 million. I can't imagine spending that much money on a wedding. I know my father-in-law sold some firearms to pay for our wedding, so we truly had a shotgun marriage, as he likes to joke. But, hey, as we've said before, love is love, right? Everybody can do what they want when it comes to their marriage. But here we're talking about prenuptial agreements. And as many of you know, when Jeff Bezos was divorced, when the divorce was finalized with his previous wife, Mackenzie Scott, it set a record for the most expensive divorce. This was back in 2019, and it was widely known there was no prenuptial agreement. Now, it wasn't known, or at least I haven't seen anything about whether anyone said one way or another, whether there was a postnuptial agreement, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. But in that divorce, Mackenzie Scott received 25% of the Amazon shares that they had, which were valued at roughly $38 billion. That's right, with a B, $38 billion at the time.
I'll marry Jeff Bezos for that.
Well, right now, his estimated net worth is $233 billion, okay? So he's not doing too bad. He's still okay. He's scraping by, but, he'll make it, I think. So with this go-around with Ms. Sánchez, he is taking those extra precautions. They are, reportedly, they were going to get married earlier. There was, lots of rumors about that. Jeff Bezos came out and said, no, that wasn't true. But there were some rumors that they were planning on getting married earlier. His legal team was cautioning him against that because the details of the prenuptial agreement were not finalized yet. And so, definitely not something you want to be rushing into, especially when you're trying to protect that sizable fortune that he has. So, not uncommon, not unusual, probably a smart move to not rush that. So let's talk a little bit about prenuptial agreements and some of the things that go into it and why it is not just for the ultra wealthy. Prenuptial agreements, they generally are going to address property and maintenance or alimony or spousal support, whatever your jurisdiction calls it. But those are the two main topics that they're going to address, but they can address a lot of other things too. Non-disparagement clauses, clauses to prevent somebody from disclosing information to the media, a lot of things. They can't address custody. They can't address child support because those are the type of things, or at least as far as I'm aware, and again, I'm not well-versed in every jurisdiction, but particularly, I can tell you in the state of Missouri where I practice, they cannot address custody or child support because those are things that have to be determined at the time of divorce, which makes sense. You think about custody, what's in the best interest of the children, and you can't sort of plan for that in advance. Circumstances might change. Same thing with child support. Those are going to be, child support determinations are going to be based off of income at the time, what are the needs of the children, different things like that. So not the type of thing that you could necessarily negotiate before you get married, or at least in my opinion, wouldn't make sense to do that. So you can't really address those things, but you can address property division. You can address spousal support. And those are things that, going into a marriage, a lot of times that's not something that you're going to be thinking about, particularly if it's your first marriage, if you're not a high asset individual. But they are becoming more and more common for individuals of all income levels. And there's a couple of important reasons for that. One is it takes the uncertainty out of a potential future divorce. Nobody really wants to be planning for a future divorce, but that uncertainty can be very stressful. And so having that prenuptial agreement, having those terms negotiated out before you get into what could be a heated divorce case seems like a good idea. A lot of times people think, well, that prenuptial agreement is there so that the richer party can basically leave the, we'll say, less wealthy party with less or with nothing. Generally speaking, it's not intended to leave the other spouse with nothing, but it's more to remove that uncertainty. As I'm sure you can imagine, particularly for high wealth individuals, there are not a lot of times where they probably don't feel like they're in control of the situation, which makes sense. But a divorce process is one of those processes where there's a lot of control that you lose when you're involved in that process. So having a prenuptial agreement and removing some of that doubt can be, from a mental health standpoint, very reassuring for somebody, so that if that day comes, then those issues have already been taken care of. So a couple of other things that, you can see sometimes in these prenuptial agreements, you'll see language about waiving maintenance, waiving spousal support. And usually there is some sort of offset. Often, I guess I should say, there is some sort of offset where, if the parties are married for X number of years, then usually we'll see in these, the wife will receive some sort of, payout based on the number of years of marriage, or if they surpass a certain number of years of marriage, then there would be a certain payout or buyout of maintenance. You can also have a sunset clause where it says if we are married for, say, 30 years, right? We pass the 30-year mark, then this agreement is null and void, okay? And that, that sort of incentivizes a happy and long-lasting relationship. Now, you could say, well, what if somebody waits until 30 years and one day, and then they say, all right, I'm done. I'm filing for divorce. Yeah, that could happen. But generally speaking, if you know that's coming and you have this sunset provision, that person may choose to file for divorce a little bit earlier. It's not something that generally, I think the court would like to see in terms of strategically filing for a divorce because of a sunset clause in a prenuptial agreement. But those are some provisions that we would see in a prenuptial agreement. Some other things that you have to consider when you're doing a prenuptial agreement, particularly for somebody like Jeff Bezos, who, he's got assets all over the world, right? He's got homes in London, I'm sure California, New York. With all of these different locations that, we've talked about before, the jurisdictional question, where is a divorce case going to be brought? And if it can be brought in multiple locations, one of the things that his legal team has probably had to deal with is ensuring that the prenuptial agreement is going to be valid in all of these jurisdictions. Because if, let's say, he's only covered California, but New York's laws are different, and the case is brought in New York and it's an appropriate jurisdiction, then that New York judge might throw out the prenuptial agreement and say it's invalid. And the last thing you want to do is negotiate out a prenuptial agreement and then be relying on that, and then divorce comes around and that prenuptial agreement is thrown out as being void or unenforceable. So those are some of the really important things. I mentioned earlier, there's also something called a postnuptial agreement. Prenuptial agreements, sometimes they're also called anti-nuptial agreements, not like anti-hero, but anti-ante or before nuptials. Postnuptial agreements, exactly what it sounds like. Postnuptial agreement is an agreement that's reached after the parties were married, but it's also addressing all of those issues in terms of asset division, maintenance, things like that. Those are generally analyzed the same way as a prenuptial agreement in terms of, making sure all of the assets were disclosed, making sure that both parties had the opportunity to speak with counsel, making sure that they had enough time to review the document, that there was, full and fair disclosure. All of these elements that, without getting into all of these specific legal details, are necessary for a court to find that these things are valid and enforceable. Because the last thing the court wants to see is somebody essentially tricked into signing a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement where they are waiving important rights without knowing and understanding what those rights are. So having an attorney review that with you, go over it with you, make sure that the provisions are going to be enforceable going forward is a really important step in that process. And that's something that I've been a part of. I've been a part on both sides. And I guess I should say in all three sides, in the drafting, in the enforcement, and in contesting those types of agreements. And so there's a lot of nuance and detail that goes into those things. So it's really important to have an attorney who knows and understands what is going to make those valid, make those enforceable. It's important to have an attorney go over that with you. So, prenuptial agreements, like I said, for the ultra wealthy, that sounds like something that seems normal. For, your average individual, you, me, it may not seem like that's something that is necessary, but some situations where you really do want to strongly consider that. First of all, I would say anyone of any income bracket, if you have assets that you want to protect in a divorce case, a prenuptial agreement might be for you. Also, if you have children from a previous marriage or a previous relationship that you want to make sure that those children are provided for in a certain way, prenuptial agreement might be for you. Prenuptial agreements also, it's important to know this, okay? So prenuptial agreements aren't only for divorce cases. It's also used for estate planning. So if, for example, you're getting married, you have no intentions, no expectations that you would ever get divorced, but you have kids from a previous relationship. You want to make sure those kids are going to be taken care of, and you want to avoid the statutory presumptions, the way that the law would normally apply to your estate whenever you pass away. A prenuptial agreement is what you'll need, or a postnuptial agreement, because essentially, at its bare bones, it is a contract. It's a contract saying we're not going to follow what the law says should be followed. We're going to follow what we've agreed to, what the terms of this contract are. So having that in place to make sure that your wishes, whether it be in the event of a divorce, in the event of a legal separation, or in the event of your passing, if you want those things to be secured and you want it to be different from what the law would normally provide, a prenuptial agreement is something that you should absolutely be thinking about and speaking with your attorney about. So I know a lot of people take issue with prenuptial agreements. Why are you planning for a divorce? Why are you getting married if you're just planning for the divorce? Like I said, there's lots of reasons to utilize a prenuptial agreement. And a lot of times it's not the expectation of a divorce. It's just getting out ahead of that and making sure that your ultimate wishes, your ultimate goals are going to be followed in the instance that you may get divorced or at your passing. Like I said, it's used as an estate planning tool. So for me, this is one of those areas that absolutely falls right in line with this podcast. No judgment whatsoever about anybody who wants a prenuptial agreement wants to address those things in advance. And like I said, it's a great way to make sure that your wishes are going to be respected and followed in the case of a divorce, but also in the case of somebody's passing. So until next time, no judgment here. Don't forget, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let us know, what do you want to hear about? All right, we've gotten a few episodes in here. We're going to have some guests on coming up here, and so look forward for those. But hit that like button, hit that subscribe, and we will see you next time.